welcome to, I think it's the third or fourth of these webinars that we've been doing with some of our international colleagues and various other people of import. And of course, we got to the bottom of the list and didn't have anybody else to talk to. So I thought, hey, let's call Jim, right? So welcome everybody wherever you are, who are dialing into this. So it's late at night in Canada, Jim, is that right?
It's 9 p.m. What
9
time is it there, Ken? It's always good for you, but never good for me. How come?
That's the way it should be, Jim. That's just how things work in the great southern land. So this webinar will be live streamed on a couple of social media platforms, as well as, of course, going to a great many of our staff. And so now this is an opportunity for us, while many of us are in some form of lockdown, to just get a bit of a sense about what our colleagues are doing with this issue of the COVID-19 issue, the whole lockdown thing, and get a sense and can I say R&D, what other organisations that are a bit like us are doing. And for anyone outside of Haven Home Safe, you've probably heard the term R&D and understand it to mean research and development. In our case, it stands for rip off and duplicate. But anyway, we're bringing you here this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on your time zone, one of my great friends and tremendous colleagues, a man who is internationally regarded in the trade, Jim Steele, who's the CEO of Windsor Essex Community Housing, based in the city, the beautiful city of Windsor, which is just across the road from one of the pandemic central cities, which is Detroit. So literally across a bridge across the amazing river, part of those incredible lakes in Canada. So Jim's been the CEO of Windsor Essex Community Housing for 26 years and 5 months, which puts him about 2 months in front of how long I've been around. So Jim started a little bit before me. Jim also has his birthday a little bit before me, and we are the same age. Although I like to point out that I've got hair and he doesn't. So Jim, of course, has gorgeous girls, Christy and Steffi. Say good day to them for me, Jim. And Jim and Joe also have Travis and Carly. So please say hello to them for me too, Jim. We've met them all, and they're gorgeous kids. And the other thing you probably work out of that is pretty much everything Jim does, I just do a bit later, which I'm not sure I'm comfortable with, Jim. There you go.
It's usually you're a little bit ahead on a few things, so we'll go through that.
That's very kind of you. So anyway, enough with the pleasantries. It's unusual that I'd be pleasant to Jim, but I am making an effort because this is being recorded and we have shocking defamation laws here in Australia, Jim, so I'll be really careful. But anyway, Jim, I'll make the observation that we met in Washington in 2011 when the Australians made our first appearance in the International Housing Partnership, the group that meets once a year and trades ideas and builds capacity amongst our four nations, America, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, in the community housing field. And because we were the smallest kids on the block, Jim, as you know, our organisations are nowhere near as big as many of yours. We thought we'd make an entrance by having a barbecue at the Australian Embassy with the big guy there, Kim, who was the Australian ambassador. And we assembled the entire executive team of housing and urban development from the United States, which was a bit of a thrill for our Americans because most of them had only ever heard of these people and never met them. So that was kind of how we established our credibility: a barbecue, a beer, and a few mates, as it turns out. So Jim, enough of that. Tell me how you guys are going there in Windsor with the lockdown, and what's it mean for you guys there in Canada?
Well, just back to your story, I think a little bit of the difference there is we like to follow the process and procedures, and your example of the Washington thing is pretty good. So if you remember, we went to the Canadian Embassy, we waited outside for 15 minutes, we went into some magical room that looked like something was happening, but it really wasn't happening, and then we had to go into another elevator, and about an hour later, we actually got into the building to have the Canadian beer and whatever food we were having. Followed by the next night, we did the Australian Embassy thing where the sirens and lights were all going off and everybody was just waving us through. I think that sort of summed up that maybe we can be a little bit stuck on our rules sometimes, and maybe you Aussies are a little bit more freewheeling, and we need to maybe relax a little bit like that. We also need to follow your COVID numbers. So whatever has happened, I was just checking those before I checked in here. We're at like 64,000 COVID cases, and you guys were at about 6,900. So we're only 10 times further off. You have only about 97 fatalities. We have 4,200 fatalities. Windsor versus Bendigo. Do you even have COVID in Bendigo yet, Ken?
Yeah, we had one confirmed case in Bendigo itself, and that case is cleared, and we've had none since.
And then in our situation, a lot of ours were in long-term care homes. So there was some community transmission, but when you're looking at where did it actually come out of, and there's going to be a big review when this is done about long-term care and how we look after it. I'm not sure what term you use for nursing homes, rest homes over there.
Similar terms, Jim. Yeah.
Similar terms. And what we're looking at is how do we fix that? Of course, in our situation, we want people to stay in our buildings longer and build more of our buildings. And we can maybe eliminate the long-term care problem by eliminating long-term care.
Yeah.
So
Jim,
just quickly, did you want a quick summary?
Yeah, please.
So 5,000 units. We have 731 buildings. We have one of every type of building. That's how we like to put it. We've got 400 unit high rises, and we have single family homes. The average age of what was the public housing stock that we inherited, it's almost 50 years old now. Initially built by the federal government, Canada Mortgage and Housing built it, but it's always been locally managed. About 2001, a lot of it got downloaded from the province down to municipalities. So our shareholder is the City of Windsor. We amalgamated in 2007 to get up to our current size of stock. But with an age range from 1951 to 1988, when these buildings were built, we've got a lot of work to go into regenerate this stock. So it's still in pretty good shape, but there's some edges that are starting to fray a little bit. We need to do some work on that. And we've started to build some new buildings. We've got a new building underway to the passive house standard. I'm sure you're aware of that one. But it's kind of stuck in the COVID crisis at the moment. So we're just waiting to come out of that lockdown so we can start to build. We've got a nice national housing strategy. We're looking forward to working with that. That's how we're actually building the new building, the National Housing Co-Investment Fund. We're very proud of it in that all three levels of government are in on it. So the city and the county, the province, the federal government. And then we've got partnerships with Community Living Windsor and Hiatus House that looks after intellectual disabilities in our community, as well as victims of violence. So we're trying to get everything in the right spot there. And we're looking to get another big bit of the National Housing Strategy money. We're looking for $170 million over the next 10 years to upgrade the existing stock. So we need to add more stock to deal with some of the issues we've talked about, and we need to fix the existing. If we lose the existing, we're going backwards.
It's interesting, Jim, that that in the US and particularly and progressively, I think in Canada, that the preservation of affordable housing is considered as important as the new supply. And I think that's something in Australia that we've just completely missed the boat on and continue to miss the boat on. And it's really disturbing. But I was so pleased to hear that Canada has a national housing strategy, which was an initiative of Mr. Trudeau. But I recall a few years before Trudeau came to power that I was in a room in Ottawa with the Canadian leaders who became the founders of the Chartered Institute of Housing in Canada, and I was talking to them about, how do you prepare for a national approach to housing? And everybody around the room, and I think Steve Pomeroy and others were there, were going, "Oh, that's never going to happen. It's all province-based here. There'll never be a national housing strategy." And I was going, "Well, why not? Why don't you have a crack? Why wouldn't you be pushing for it?" And voila, a couple of years later, and what a difference that seems to have made. That tell me about Housing Partnership Canada, Jim, and how that's working now, because you guys, here in Australia, we've been talking about trying to create a national bond aggregator for about 16 years. and we got one last year. You guys started talking about it a little bit later than that.
Well, we went backwards on it, to be honest. So a lot of us kind of joined into the international partnership, sort of coming at it backwards. I mean, you came into it as Australia came in a little bit more organized. We just appeared, and I think we just never left, and they sort of kept us. But we liked a lot of the work that you had done, and what we had done there was formed Housing Partnership Canada. We were about 20 of us at the time. We're about 25 now. So, but what we had done was just got in the room, and then how do you talk to each other? So that's why we brought you over. And Housing Partnership Canada came out of one of those initial meetings where we just had someone deal with the leadership issues. And then the leadership just sort of rose from that. So a big thank you to you for starting that leadership piece for us. And as one of the pieces we learned was Chartered Institute of Housing Canada on the education side for training and development. And again, I think you must have got a little bit sick of traveling across the pond there, but dragged you in there a couple of times for that one. But those were the key pieces that we got out of some of those initial pieces that the partnership had. And then the national housing strategy, we didn't create it. The environment had to be just right. But a lot of things we were asking for and seeking are in there, and things we're good at, like energy management. It's cold in Canada, you see, Ken, and that's why I mean, it was shorts and t-shirts on Sunday, and it's going to snow this Sunday. So in 1 week, if you don't like the weather you're looking at right now, just wait 20 minutes and you get a new set of weather. What we were looking at there in the strategies were the energy management, but also some accessibility guidelines. And that's where we're going to use the R&D from you guys. We were very impressed with what Haven Home Safe had done on some of the accessibility guideline pieces. We liked the throw it all out, design a new unit, use whatever technology is there, have the cupboards moving up and down with remote controls. And those are things that are really needed. And it turns out that's what our federal government is wanting. And all of my team that's on here right now wanting to volunteer to come down and take a look at your stuff. But I think I can offer free trips right now, can't I? Because you won't let them in anyway.
Well, I think it was Hans, who's your asset manager, is off building things at the moment, as I understand. Hey, Hans, how you doing? And actually, while I'm saying good day, I better say good day to Kirk as well, and Beverly, there's Kerry, Jeff, and Charles, your new CFO or acting CFO. So, hey, team, you're all welcome anytime. Bring ideas, we'll shamelessly steal them. That's what we do. And thank you for those kind comments, Jim, too, about the connections that we've made at the IHP that established, took power housing on a different path here in Australia, gave us the opportunity to share some knowledge with our Canadian counterparts, and then watched you guys and you and Howie and Shane Ramsey and others just become that powerhouse that created in essence, your own bond aggregator and your mortgage banks, and then seeing a national housing strategy start to give prominence to affordable housing in Canada. So, we sit back here in Australia and go, we had such a promising start, and then it's all just kind of just slowed. But, who knows what post-COVID this will look like. Jim, we've had to have transitioned people to work from home really rapidly, and I assume the same things probably happened with you. What are some of the things that you've done there, and what are some of the learnings you think that are coming out of this?
Just before a lot of the working at home, we were very fortunate in the last couple of years to have hired a safety manager. So our business continuity plans, even a pandemic outlook had already been prepared. So a lot of that layout was there. So months before we actually needed them, we were doing things like ordering more laptops. We had a lot of PPE. We redirected, maybe overbought a bit. It gets redirected to the healthcare system, as it should. But a lot of our people, we switched, did a lot of reassignment of work. All the things that we used to do, good job at cleaning our buildings. Now it's enhanced cleaning. So you've doubled up on everything. I didn't think we'd ever have a device that would go through and fog our buildings to clean them, but our staff are doing those things now. And credit to them, not one sick day lost in it. The only thing in our planning that we likely have sort of missed out on was we were predicting that our staff would be affected by COVID at a very high rate. And our plans geared up for that. And in fact, we've only lost people to lockdown issues like childcare and looking after a vulnerable spouse or other relative that it's other commitments. It wasn't their health. So we've got a good, strong, healthy group. We started working at home early March, and then we just increased that. One of the things we did a lot of with people that were at home was, here's the tenant list, here's the phone number, give them a call. We were really worried about our seniors buildings, but 95% of the people in our seniors buildings have enough income to get through. They are comfortable where they're at. They are healthy. They had maybe, again, 5% maybe had some issues that they needed to be dealt with, and they're dealing with it. Our tenants paid rent. I think maybe an extra 4% had some issues. We've tried to be flexible with the tenants, and we really didn't need to be. We tried to be more flexible with our employees, and just opened it up for them. And that seemed to have worked good. We implemented a Microsoft Teams environment, which is sort of like Zoom with security. And it was a bit of a savior for us. And I think actually I likely see more of my staff more often through this thing than when I'm in my office.
Yeah, so it's interesting, Jim, and I think actually I would reflect that too. I'm certainly, during this period, we've been, in more communication, whether it's through WhatsApp in the morning, checking in with people, or Zoom or Microsoft Teams or any of the platforms that are now in common and all in common use. I think it was really interesting because we also expected to have staff affected by COVID-19, and that's not happened. We expect a large number of tenants to be affected. That's not happened. We expected that because of the economic destruction that this is wreaking through our economies, that this would play out with significant impacts on our rents, and that, of course, as you know, cuts to your operating ability. Not happened at all. We expected to see large amounts of direct debits cancelled. Haven't seen that. Everything is. I mean, we've seen a few people whose income have been affected, and they've made representation to us as we invite them to tell us their circumstances have changed, and most of those things are being approved. And so, in that sense, it's kind of this surreal business as usual almost, but we're all doing it differently. I've been working from home. Yesterday, I was in the boardroom in Melbourne for a board meeting, but there was only 2 of us in the boardroom, and everyone else was on Zoom. So but very, very many similarities in both environment and how we're coping. So in terms of how we're coping, I guess some of the things I'd be interested in is, given that there are so many similarities, even though our jurisdictions are very different, what are some of the things that you think people are missing in this change? Because we're all talking about what we're doing, but I wonder sometimes what we're missing.
Well, we sort of got stuck into this crisis mode, and we just went there, did what we had to do. And I think what we're going to miss out on is we're likely losing the year on training and development. I really liked, some of the things we talked about, Housing Partnership Canada, CIH Canada, all of the conferences that our people used to go to. You and I have a lot of these sessions, and we get more interaction with outside of our work environment, but our staff got it through these other pieces by attending the nonprofit conference, the Canadian Housing Renewal Association, and they would do training for Passive House. They would go there, they would learn about Passive House, and as we're building one, it would really helps our people. So what we're missing out on is those education pieces, and working with our partners, hopefully we can get some of that adjustment done. But I miss the trades. I miss the thinker in residence. I mean, I kind of thought you were crazy when you invented that thing once. I kind of thought maybe you were, okay, maybe not crazy. Maybe you were just joshing me around a bit. Yeah, to get there and to actually see what you do at Haven Home Safe, to see where you put staff on the same side as the customer. It's one thing to hear that, but to see it done when they drag you away from a meeting with me so that it's your turn, get your butt out there, Ken, that you have to be out there and helping the customer. I think that was a novel way to approach things. And while we don't implement everything that we see, we take the good pieces that we can get out of that, and we'll and I think those are some of the things that we're going to miss, those personal contacts. It's going to be a while before we get back to those, unless I can set up a training session for you to dial into my people.
Anytime, Jim, anytime. But I will tell them the truth about you, and they may not want to hear it.
They know it by now.
Although you were one of our thinkers in residence, and so you had free reign in my office. It only seems fair that I get you back at some point.
It's only fair, Ken.
So a couple of things there that I think were really interesting. And when you were talking about, our staff being on this, literally on the customer side of the counter, that's our concierge model, of course, that we've been running here for a few years now. And that really is about having a welcoming voice and a welcoming presence, and that subconscious message when you open the door for someone to invite them into the office, that in fact that they are not only welcome but honoured, and that we are recognising their presence as someone important. And that's incredibly important in de-escalating what is often very anxious and anxiety-ridden behaviour. And so one of the great challenges for us, of course, is with a lack of face-to-face activity now, is how do we deal with people who come in who have nowhere to go? They can't isolate because they've nowhere to put their head, nowhere to lay their body down overnight. How do you do that? So we've invented that virtual concierge, which I think, it was an idea I had about, well, in the absence of a person at the counter, how can we deal with this? We rammed it through, but I had great trepidation about how it would work. And bizarrely, it's actually probably working better in most cases, because people are now used to this lockdown. They're used to things being closed. They're used to people standing back a long way away, and suddenly seeing a big, welcoming, smiling face on a massive big screen saying, "Welcome. Thanks for coming. What can we do for you? Sorry, we can't be there in person. But hey, we're just on the other side of the wall there, so let's see what we can do, and let me direct you to an interviewer." Makes all the difference, and I think we'll institutionalise that as we go. I was just interested in when you mentioned ONFA, the Ontario National Not-for-Profit Housing Conference, that for some reason I got an invitation to speak to some years ago, and I was thinking Ontario, it's a province, right? I didn't realise it was the biggest province, and I think that was my first time in Toronto, and I just thought, yeah, Toronto, it's probably like Bendigo but a little bit bigger. God, it's massive. And then there was that sea at the front, which someone kept saying is a lake, and it's like, you can't see the horizon. How can that be a lake? We have a slightly different view of some of these things, Jim, as you know, but to go to ONFA and see the scale of that housing conference is like nothing we have here in Australia. Every couple of years we have a national housing conference, and we get 1,500, maybe, I think 2,000, something like that was a record. But ONFA, it eats that alive. So fascinating stuff in terms of just the volume, and certainly the training and development in the sector in Canada is light years in front of where we are in Australia. Although people like the Australian Housing Institute, of which now Trudy is on the board as the Victorian representative, they work very hard with the limited resources they have, to continue to professionalise the sector. So that's kind of good to hear. Jim, I'm thinking about this, and we're talking about some of the things that we've done well, and thank you for the compliments. I can only say they're deserved. My job is, of course, to take the credit, and occasionally apportion the blame, as I like to say. One day someone's going to think that I'm saying that and mean it. The reality, however, is not everything always works. Often things go wrong. If things didn't go wrong, we probably wouldn't need half the managers and CEOs that we have in the world today. What are some of the things that you think that you might have done better? I mean, I'm happy to trade with you some of the things that I think we could have done better, but where do you go with that?
I think we could have been more flexible with the roles in the corporation. Here, when it first happened, we thought, well, we just open things up and and try and make it as easy for staff and be flexible with their time, if they needed leave and all those things. What we really needed to look at too was relax some of the roles that we have. There seems to be like little boundaries that we put around each of the roles. And in some cases, what we did is we had some people who couldn't work in the existing environment, and they needed to work from home in some manner. One of our managers, one of our newest managers you haven't met yet, Michelle, went down the list, found somebody who had a teacher's degree, but was doing some clerical work for us. Moved her over to help Hans in writing papers for our regeneration project. So we need to do some things like that. We need to reassign people very quickly and move them to where they're needed. We could have been a lot better at moving those around and having staff prepared for that. And communication. We've got a great communications team that's always out there looking for new ways to do things. And they're good at the Twitter and the things that I'm not good at. But we would like to pursue your virtual concierge and some things like that. So we could have been a little bit quicker on some of those things, on consistently putting the message out there. We had maybe a 2-week delay on some of that stuff. We should have had no delay on some of those things. But what did you get out of it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because one of the things, you know, in retrospect, very similar journey on that. The moment it was called a pandemic here in Australia in mid-February, which was a bit before the World Health Organization, and we shut the borders with China, basically. And so that's really the thing that really set us on a path to where we are now, which is essentially, you know, in subduing the virus, if not eliminating it in most parts of Australia. But when it became clear that we were going to go into some form of lockdown, which was in the first week of March, and that was then called, I think, about the 10th of March, and we could see that the next stage would follow rapidly, which I think was the 23rd of March. We also had a business continuity management plan, not specifically written up as a pandemic plan, but it had enough in it, you know, as you'd appreciate, in a land of flooding rains and terrible bushfires, the notion of disaster is never far from our doorstep. So it was pretty easy, in a sense, to get the business continuity management team up and running, and they've been meeting weekly, and a small crisis management team, which has only needed to meet a couple of times, which includes the chair, which has been fabulous. And we were able to roll it out. But one of the things that I reckon I should have done, and I don't know if anyone else has done this, and if my international or other colleagues have done this, I'd be really keen to hear about it, is I should have nominated someone as the COVID commissar. And I should have given them some specific generalist staff and said, go do this and do it today. Go do this and do it tomorrow. Go do this and get it done by this week. But instead what we did is we kind of adopted an executive management approach of determining what needed to be done, making it happen as quick as we could, but not actually relieving anybody of their existing day jobs. And so while there's been this change in people's existing day jobs, it's not that big of a change, you know, because as we talked about before, a lot of this is still business as usual for us. Mm-hmm. And so we really have asked our executive team and our general managers and people like our HR people and our marketing and comms people. You've met Chantal and Sue, and, you know, they have just been living and breathing this thing, living and breathing it. And so,
well, it's interesting because that piece, your czar or whatever you want to call it, is in our plan. We didn't get to that stage. Where that kicked in was if we started to lose staff.
Yep.
So I think if we got to 60% of staff, then that kicked in.
Right.
We always have had, I think maybe at most out of 100 people, we're down maybe 5 or 6 with other commitments. So we did have that in our plan. It just never got kicked in.
Yeah. And I think one of the things for us is, you know, and you probably have similar things, is that, you know, we haven't, because we need to be open to the public for the homelessness part of our business, which is, you know, the purpose of our existence. We split our teams. And so we'd have half the team working from home, half the team in the office for those frontline functions, and then some key people in other functions still in the offices. So the frontline people are just not there as we like to say, like a shag on a rock. And that's kind of worked well, but we were conscious that we might need to, if anyone went down with COVID, that we'd probably need to come in and fog the workplace and do a deep clean and bring in another team in. So all of that stuff was there in the background. And in terms of, I guess another thing similar to maybe not Windsor, I don't know, the bushfires are a big part of the world in Windsor, Jim, but certainly for Brian up in Calgary, was it not Calgary, further up where they had those terrible fires a few years ago?
Yeah,
So
Edmonton.
that's a reality for us. And so we have an established kind of series of steps for those sorts of disasters. So we were able to swing that stuff in quickly. And like you guys with your vulnerable tenants, we contacted each of more than 500 of our tenants off our relatively small portfolio of homes to see how they were going and make sure that we could keep them, up to speed with information and that sort of thing. So
we don't have
learning, I think.
We don't have bushfires, but I do have to be careful because I think on a couple of your webinars coming up, you've got some Americans following me. So I might need some rebuttal time later, but our biggest crisis is sort of keeping the Americans back. You closed your border, we closed ours, and maybe a little late, but almost all the cases that they've tracked back so far, the COVID came in through the States.
Yeah.
Windsor is so interconnected with Detroit. We love Detroit, and a lot of us go over there all the time to enjoy the entertainment, the food.
And also, Jim, I've seen you talking to the US Customs officials on a first name basis. So yeah, you do cross that border a lot.
And it's a commute for me almost. And then, but what we've come, even now with our healthcare workers, we've got a lot of nurses and doctors that work there, and they're crossing all the time. So for us to really only have about 670 COVID cases in Windsor Essex is a testament to our health unit stepping up. And I think when we're looking at what really went right for us, it's our mayor, our premier, and our prime minister. And while they're all of different political colors, they took the politics and just put it aside, and it went away. And they just dealt with the reality of it. And they let the experts do the guidance on, we're going to flatten this curve, we're going to lock things down, we're going to do all of these things. And that's really helped us. And when the border closed, that made a lot more comfort. We have a lot of staff who have spouses that work there.
Yep.
And so it's a little bit fearful. You get some different reactions out of people that you wouldn't have gotten previous, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm only afraid of Bob because Bob's wife works over there in the States. So, okay, well, now I got to stay away from Bob. Bob's no good. You see some things that you wouldn't have seen in other environments, but I'll leave the American thing. You can just look up the numbers and see where they're at. And your colleagues are wonderful, so I won't invoke any issue.
No, but it is worth remembering, was it 1812? The Canadians did go down and teach the Americans a lesson, I believe. Was it 1812, Jim?
1812.
1812. Yeah.
We burnt the White House down.
Yeah, I think you burnt the White House down, and there was some rumour that former members of the New South Wales Rum Corps who'd been repatriated back to Britain after basically trying a small rebellion, had been press ganged into one of the British regiments that helped burn the White House down. So I like to remind the Americans also that we too played our part in burning the White House down. So, however tenuous the link, I might add, Jim. So
their leader seems to rewrite history, so you and I can rewrite history too.
Absolutely. Fascinating stuff. So the COVID-19, I think most people understand that it's now a thing. It's now with us. It's not going to go away. It'll just reverberate around. There'll be outbreaks from time to time. God knows what it's going to do in the third world, which we're perhaps a little bit closer to in Canada, but fortunately we are a big island nation. And, it just sends shivers down my spine when I think about what this is going to do in sub-Saharan Africa and India and much of Asia, but including some of our, very close dear friends like Indonesia. But we are going to come out of this lockdown process. I think Australia is now, there's a national cabinet meeting underway as we speak, Jim. That's the thing we have in common with our premiers and leaders here. We're also having a meeting at the same time. That's pretty much where it ends. But we are going to come out of this in some fashion. So what do you think the transition is going to look like? And what are some of the things that you think you need to be thinking about in terms of transitioning out of this?
Oh, we are indeed a wonderful document from a company called Cushman and Wakefield. And we're just ripping and duplicating that baby like you wouldn't believe.
I would believe it, Jim, because you sent it to me and we're ripping it off as well.
Rather than you have to go through all the effort of ripping it off, I'll just send it to you.
That would be helpful.
Wonderfully spelled out. Things like 6-foot circles in your office. Always walk clockwise. I think I'll have to teach some people what clockwise is. Because they don't really, these kids these days, Ken, it's all digital to them.
The digital generation, yeah.
So the first person I mentioned to that was too young when I said clockwise. Okay, well, we've got to work on this one. But there's a bunch of things there. I mean, we're now used to washing our hands. I think one day I counted, it's like, 25 you might do, and at 20 seconds or more. All these things we're getting used to, we're getting better at it. There's going to be disposable desk pads. We're likely going to have a cleaner on staff that just does offices and not at night, right? Yep. So when you use the boardroom, you're going to have to leave it in a pristine state. And there'll be little signals that say, hey, it's in a pristine state. What we're looking at is we don't see this changing out of transition until there's a vaccine. And when there's a vaccine, maybe we can look at somewhere close to normal. But also, I think what we want to do is come out of this. Let's all the cultural things that we got rid of by doing work like this, like as we're doing it now. Let's learn from that. Let's keep all of those things, and let's see what we can get rid of. And maybe there's a couple of other things that we've missed. So we put a team together of bargaining unit members, as well as our management team. And we've put one of these documents out front of everybody, and they're going through it. And there's some great ideas that are kind of going to come out of that process. Can we clean our buildings better? And we're likely going to be putting a higher priority on, the cleaning position wasn't of the highest paid that we have in our company. Cleaners are likely going to get a better deal. I shouldn't be saying that in a year where I'm coming up on a negotiation of a 4-year agreement likely, but those are some of the things we're looking at is do some realignments on some of those things, and expectations. Staff should be expecting more. Tenants should be expecting more. If I can call every tenant in a 2 or 3 month period, and they feel better about themselves, why the hell don't I do that all the time? So where are we missing some of these things?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I want to come back to that calling tenants and calling staff thing too, because you're right. I mean, we've all been hung up, I think, on window dressing in much of what we do. And I think what this COVID-19 experience has certainly rammed home is so much of what we do that we saw as important is in fact superfluous and irrelevant and nonsensical. And by honing back in on the core elements of the job, it really is very refreshing for people. One of the other things is, the digital as panacea of all organisational problems. The world has discovered digital. We're all going digital. Now, we've been going digital for a long time. We've been building our digital capability with the intention of having that fit into a broader digital by default strategy. And so I'm by no means talking down digital, but it's not everything. And the lack of face-to-face contact is an issue. Some of my colleagues who are sort of acolytes about digital this and digital that and digital everything, and we'll have much saving because we'll be no longer doing face-to-face. We won't need offices as big. We won't need this. We won't need travel. Actually, no, none of that is true. Some of it is true. Elements of it are true. It will be different in different parts of the organisation. But one of the things that is not being talked about, and you put your finger squarely on that button, there's actually new things that we need to add into our expenditure codes. There is more expenditure in a lot of these areas than we've seen before. And so this notion that we'll get through this and we'll press a button and things will come back to something approximating what they were before it is not a true notion. You know, we need to be prepared for that. We need to be prepared that we're going to have a couple or three, at least in my view, very tough years of adjusting to new expenditure patterns, declining in different revenues, different issues with tenants, different issues with tenancy organisations, and you know, internal tenant advocates, those sorts of things. Not to mention the staffing issues. You know, we're going to need people to be more flexible. You know, someone was telling me that hot desking is making a comeback. Actually, I think quite the reverse. I think people are going to want to own their space and to know it that's their space and that no one else has been at that space. So, you know, there's a lot of cultural things that we've yet to come to grips with here as well, Jim. So in wrapping up, Jim, one of the things that I've noticed is that as our various functional teams are no longer in the building, you know, in the various building offices that we have, they're not cross-pollinating. You know, the water cooler conversation doesn't happen. The ability to poke your head over a corral or around into an office has disappeared. So those informal conversations to check in, follow through, all missing. And so what I've noticed is what I'm calling the siloization of teams. So all the teams are checking in every day, checking in with each other on Zoom conferences, on Microsoft Team conferences, but they're becoming, you know, one of the things I've noticed is people are so focused on that part of their role that actually there's a little bit of forgetting that actually we're all part of one organisation. And so, you know, that's something that we're going to start trying to pick up on as one of the things we need to be aware of. So as we wrap up, because I know Sue Masters will just cut us off she'll cast us off like a dirty sock if we go too long, Jim. What are some of the things that, you know, wrapping up that you think we need to be conscious of going forward, do you think?
Well, your point is well taken, and you start to see it, but the cross section. So we used to call it a T-shaped employee. So you've got your silo this way, and what we did was spent a lot of effort on having the employees working this way across the teams, and therefore T-shaped employee. And we thought that worked quite well. It works a bit here, and we're seeing it in Microsoft Teams in that we're trying to use more functions. So there was a pandemic team, there was a tenant wellness check team, but as the different teams came up, it wasn't all just, this is asset management, this is operations. So we get a little bit of it, but you're right, I worry about how that's going to come out of it. I think we've all got stuck into this, and you and I get maybe a better view of it. When you're the chief exec, there's this how do you make everybody the chief exec, right? So how can you let everybody have the same knowledge that we have of everything instead of putting them into the little silo and the mental health issues that are going to come out of that. We're used to now lockdown, and those of us who don't necessarily want to get back out in the workforce too soon, what are we going to feel that first day I go back to the office? Has somebody been in my office? I think mental health is going to be the biggest issue coming out of this. It's going to mess with all of us in a different way. And I think we need to do, actually I was reviewing today for a newsletter putting out tomorrow on the mental health checklists, and our Canadian military and the medical associations all have these nice checklists. If you want to R&D that, Ken, I'll send that over
just
to you.
Just flick them over, Jim. That'd be great. We'll stick our logo on it and remove the Canadian language, and away we go.
There, but it's nice, and you can sort of see that, and we're not all green. It's like a green light, yellow light, red light. We're not all green in everything, and you can admit to yourself, and that's the big thing on the mental health. So I think what's going to come out of it is, how do we get out of that? How do we, when you wake up in the morning, you want to look at the curve flattening. You start to look at someone getting sick and somebody dying as a factor of a curve, and it's like a sports score when you wake up in the morning. And how did we do? That affects you on the inside, and that's going to be resulting in a mental health issue when it becomes real again. And I just think that's going to be the next big thing that you and I are going to have to make sure we're supporting our teams on, and we're going to have to spend a bit of money on it.
You know, I think you're exactly right, Jim. You know, this the referee's going to blow the whistle on the lockdown in Australia, you know, progressively and slowly. But there's no doubt that whistle's going to get blown, and I think it'll take a little time, but then we'll start to see the damage. It'll start to pop up in all sorts of unexpected and different ways. You know, people will be strangely and unusually dissatisfied with some very minor thing in their particular role, and will assume a greater prominence. And actually, a lot of that will just be COVID-19 stress, post-traumatic stress, all that sort of stuff that we're going to see, apart from the potentially florid stuff.
And my last point would be then look at our tenants. And we haven't had a lot of instance of COVID in our tenants. And on the one side, that makes us happy. We think we've done a good job of protecting, but it also shows that that's how isolated they are. And that's why they're there. So I know you need to wrap up.
Well, I'm just gonna go to some questions, and I also want to say we've got Greg and Nicole Peel. You would have met Greg and Nicole at the London IHP from the Bendigo Bank guy at the time. So hey, Greg and Nicole, and our good friend Manuel is on the call. He's checking Jim to make sure we don't disparage any Americans, I reckon. Hey, Manuel. So so Paul Somerville says, hey Jim, great to see you. And Paul's got a question for you. Do you expect the current CV crisis to impact on the rollout of your national housing strategy? I think you probably answered that as you went. Things are caught up in the planning phase, but are you expecting a stimulus package from the government to keep your residential construction industry going? And is that likely to flow back to you guys?
We are for sure hoping on it. The federal government, through Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, does a lot of stuff other than just the national housing strategy. From the global financial crisis, they do a lot of background work on supporting the health of the economy through insurance and some other pieces. And the big tranches of money that are going to come out of this is what we want to get access to. We've written, of course, through Housing Partnership Canada, and we've written and said we needed to be, we can create jobs, we can build affordable housing and do all of these things. It's a matter of being in the right spot at the right time. So we came out of that crisis. This one's way worse than that one was. Remember you and I talking about what we even called it, the Great Financial Crisis?
Yep, the GFC.
I think we have to change that word great. It wasn't even anything compared to this. But I have confidence.
The slightly obtuse financial crisis.
Our federal government and our provincial government is working really, really well together. And that feeds right down to the local level. And we have to keep all of those shareholders that deal with us, we have to be accountable to them. And we're one of the best bangs for the buck that are out there. And they know that. And we just have to find the right balance.
Yeah, and we're doing exactly the same thing, I think, Jim. It's probably time to wind it up because I'm getting text messages from Sue Masters saying, wind it up.
See, if she really wanted to wind it up, she should have texted me.
That's probably true. Jim, please say hello to everybody for me there. If they haven't dialed into this, and it'll be late in the night, and I would be expecting they've got much better things to do than to listen to you and me.
Well, my bedtime was like an hour ago, buddy.
And we've still got the day in front of us. Jim, have a great weekend. I look forward to catching up with you soon. And thanks for sharing your journey on the COVID experience with your housing association with us.
Well, again, the offer is there to do this again. And I really think I got to bring you into my boardroom so you can talk to my board and some of my staff, and we can do some training that way until we can get back on the flights into Australia again. Yeah,
and there is, as I say, a standing invitation for all your staff, if they're out this way, come spend some time with us. I just have to know, and this is for Hans, I just wanted to mention, Jim, that as the only housing association in the world with an ISO 55001 asset management qualification, we just sailed through the next accreditation on that, just saying.
Congratulations, by the way.
See you, Jim.
Have a good weekend.
You too, man. Cheers.
Bye now.